Yeah, welcome in a really small circle today at Saturday. Yeah, I'm happy that someone is here, and I'm really quite glad and happy to have Everest here. And we are sitting here in the exhibition, the solo show in panke.gallery with Everest Pipkin, and we thought that we use the chance that they are in Berlin and that we could have a small artist presentation, brief artist presentation, maybe 20 minutes, or and then we have a talk about the exhibition and yeah, maybe also an FAQ or a chat about the state of the world and the state of the art and yeah, and then we open up to the audience if there are some questions, and yeah, this is a plan for today, and I would give you the microphone and would say thank you and looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Um, yeah, will you check it's streaming before we carry on? I'm gonna hang out until we get the confirmation before I jump in. Working but a little quiet. Okay. Yeah. Oh, I see. We are a little quiet. Um, we can turn up. We can turn up the gain on that mic probably if we want to just. I don't know. Maybe it's fine. Maybe I'll just speak right here. Okay. Welcome to my 20 minutes. I usually do a kind of short, slide presentation. I felt like doing something a little bit different today, so I have kind of two options. One, I could just walk you through some works on my website and we can riff, or I could read a little bit about kind of some of the things I was thinking about going into this show, some of the kind of threads that I was pulling at, and then maybe pull up some examples as we hit those points. And I think I'll go for the latter. But if we want to go off on a tangent, or if you have a thought, or if anyone has a thought, feel free to jump in. We can kind of like keep it casual because it's early in the afternoon and a small room. So maybe to start, I can read the show text very briefly because I think it does talk a little bit about the methodology of this arrangement and my work in general. So the text of the show is, the history of the internet is not a timeline of platforms, but it'd be very easy to confuse one for the other. From a distance, the story of the internet technologies kind of becomes this litany of companies and interest groups and startups and funding bubbles and hype cycles. But if you ask about any individual person about their sort of history and time online, the story is generally people, right? This forum or that hobby or a movie night or a server or a raid group or a shared goal, a comment section, like these connections of personal meaning that have lasted through time, kind of even as the platform that they were hosted on generally and inevitably has crumbled. And, that history of the internet is really a history of people that are constructing spaces and homes together, even temporarily in the margins of sort of the capitalist platforms that we're stuck inside of. And so the show, and I would say a lot of my work, is thinking about that, like that condition, that space. Please come in. So I think, this is a retrospective of mostly browser-based work. I don't exclusively work in the browser, but I think it is like the center of a lot of the work and thinking that I'm doing. And a lot of this show is kind of looking at the lack of stability practices on corporate platforms. When you first came to me and were like, what if we did a retrospective? I think my response was, it's very hard to do a retrospective of even 10 years of net-based work because mostly it doesn't run anymore, and there are a variety of reasons for that. I think some of that is just changing technologies, so you can't access them in the same way as you once did. But a lot of it is that they were built on top of a structure that has since kind of had its funding revoked, or this weird little startup crumbled and they were kind of running on venture capitalist funding for 2 years. Or a really classic one is an API key was pulled because it was in fact too generous and too permissive, or platforms changing hands and changing kind of the work that is allowed to be made on them, or political changes. And so all of these things, I think, can make exhibiting work from even 10 years ago, which is not very long ago in the broad history of things, somewhat difficult. And so when we talked about how to show work over a short career, I think the response was essentially okay, well, let's think about what it is to show documentation, and what and sort of the underpinning that creates the need for documentation when spaces, platforms, etc. crumble. So this show is in 3 sections. There's a graveyard section of things that are no longer running, that either for, again, a variety of reasons, which we'll talk about more in the near future. We have some things that do still run, that do function, but are thinking about depreciation, that are thinking about link rot, that are thinking about kind of what it is to be making work on an internet of kind of transitory spaces. And then we have some works that are also thinking about a different type of developmental future. And I think that those works that are thinking about a different type of future in online space are really centered around people, really centered around co-presence. And come sit down, come on in, hi. We haven't, I've only just sort of introduced the show, you haven't missed anything. I'm Everest, hello. Yeah, so kind of on that thread of people, I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of what it is to live on a peopled internet. So this is an idea that probably feels familiar to everyone in the room. If you've ever made a friend through a multiplayer game, or kept in touch with a family member through a distant move, or just reconnected with someone from a long time ago, by recognizing their username, or just chatted in the ephemeral text chat of a live stream, which maybe some people are doing. I don't know. I should have pulled it up. I can't see it. I'll pull it up at the end of this section so I can look at comments. But you know what I mean, and by that, by kind of reaching a person through internet spaces. And even if you're somebody who's kind of kept physical proximity with those you've held dear, you've definitely gotten a dose of this during the early pandemic, where co-presence, even mediated digital co-presence, had this kind of real shine to it, right? Where ambient hanging out took on this preciousness beyond its general weight. And I really do actually mean those weird Zoom cocktail hours, but as well as cultural events that were kind of curated by art space and organizations, shows, music here too, right? The computer can be a nightclub if pressure is put on it. And I think if anyone plays multiplayer games, that feeling of the computer being a nightclub is certainly present in those. But, more than those events, anything else, I wanted to point at that sense of kind of sitting down to a computer, even chatting with no one or attending nothing in particular, and feeling you're a little bit in the world, right? It's a little bit stepping outside of the house, not entirely, but a little bit. I we got internet at home when I was a kid in the late 90s, which is meant that I spent like the back half of my childhood and kind of the front side of my teen years online, all the similar spaces, GeoCities, Neopets, Avid Gamers, forum games, web games, and like navigating around kind of that wealth of homepages and fan sites and blogs and adoptables and all the rest. And I think there were a number of like promises of that early internet, of those spaces. But I think, and there's a few of those, but a big one was not just the access to the information, but the access to the people, right? So even in rural Texas, kind of unable to walk to any friend's house, all of them living too far, I had this world of lives that was kind of in front of me and available to me in the form of website updates and chat rooms and play by post. And that was like the same sort of people watching that I would later cherish, in the front windows of cafes or in like trains looking out the window, was available to me in the browser too then. And, I think that's like, it's very present in my work even now. So a number of the works in the show are thinking about kind of distanced watching, what it is to kind of be in online spaces together. I'm gonna make sure that I think the sound won't come through. It doesn't need to come through. I'll just play this in the background. Actually, what time is it? Could we play it? Yeah. We have all the time in the world. Okay. In that case, let me just... I'll just let this sort of run for a little bit as I...
Because it is a central piece also in the installation,
yeah.
normally here in the gallery.
Yeah, it lives.
This exhibition.
Yeah, so this piece, Anonymous Animal, will kind of explain itself, although you don't have to read it necessarily and listen to me at the same time. It's just kind of going to play over there. But it is a work around co-presence and connectedness, and in kind of invisible co-presence and connectedness in online spaces, and what it is to be with others, even from this kind of mediated distance, and a hand-built internet, an internet of kind of like constructed spaces. And again, the internet of the 90s, very much so, although still now in small pockets, we'll get to that later, was like very much built like haphazardly by individuals, very piecemeal, very interconnected, and it was governed, of course, by a set of standards and like constructed out of a set of kind of shared programming languages. But the content of that fledgling internet had not that much allegiance to like user interface design groups, or Silicon Valley early online space, and like even now to a certain extent contemporary online space really feels more like a palimpsest than like a single object or a location. It's really an internet that's made out of a set of overlapping and interconnected design spaces and structures that are and were and still are like very personal. And, at the time, everyone had a homepage, everywhere was under construction, we had the user innovations of like web rings and guest books and web counters and online now tags that were really trying to bring personal presence to internet space, like this feeling of being online and present together. And, obviously not everyone was online in the early, mid, late 90s. This was still people who were located in physical locations where they could connect to the internet, where, they could go to a library or, furnish the cost of a computer. It was not the total user revolution that was like promised in the 1970s, but it was still... it was like notable, I think, early internet spaces, that it was this transition from not just being about work, right, and not just also being about play, because a lot of the previous kind of modalities of being on the computer, where like I am working versus like I am playing a game. And the networked spaces facilitated this other kind of goal, which is now so common that it's like very hard to even recognize that we're doing it, which is this goal of like ambiently hanging out, right, of passing time with others, of getting online and just sort of like being online as an activity. So this internet was kind of becoming one of being about other people. So I think it's like very hard to remember this as being a state that you switched into at a point in time where it was like, okay, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to be online, and then I'm going to be offline, because now, of course, online follows us everywhere. And I think it's very easy to kind of valorize that kind of focus when our attention is so constantly grabbed for from every side at the moment. But this is also like an internet kind of before the attention economy, before social media megaliths, some data gathering, but maybe not the hyper intense, like invasive tracking data gathering. It just like was an internet that kind of didn't know what it was becoming yet, but was still kind of becoming. And I think part of the thing that was happening in that internet was this real sense of time and of layers. Like, people getting onto their homepage, building actively, right, putting posts up by hand, building things manually, checking back into spaces to see what had changed. And I think even now you can access the archaeology of the like old forum, or the like the discarded role-playing thread, or kind of finding unlinked pages, and excavating kind of like the strata of what had previously been in those spaces is still really fascinating too, even though it's kind of like degrading and falling apart as pieces are forgotten. There's like this feeling of watching history accumulate in real time. So I think the unfolding kind of connective nature of those spaces is partly why they're really mesmerizing. So there's this like nosiness to clicking through and kind of seeing where an image was first linked from, or following a blog site that's been abandoned for a decade, to kind of like a Flickr page that's full of flowers, but also of a living room. And then someone is tagged in the living room post, and you're like, oh, okay, well, I'll go to their, Flickr, and their page links to a Reddit profile, and they've answered a bunch of questions on like an equestrian hobbyist subreddit. And then wait, like their username is shared by someone who uploads ambient field recordings, and maybe is that the same person, and oh, actually they're pretty good, and maybe I'll listen to them. And you end up in these like spaces of kind of movement and lateral connectivity, and this unfolding fascination is kind of like especially true maybe when that person is a stranger or is trying to do their best to be anonymous in their usage of web spaces, right? There's like echoes of the city street in this kind of browsing. Like there's this standing on the sidewalk and kind of watching people walk by feeling. There's coincidences on the internet and happenstances, and like a livingness in the hand-built world. I think a lot about, and this is probably familiar to all of you, the like first internet like digital bulletin boards. A good example of this is Community Memory, which has a really great, I'll just leave this running and we'll come back to it. These early kind of computerized bulletin boards, which are surrounded by flyers and notes, but also like act as kind of a local Craigslist, like, or a local kind of flea market. That phrase, right? Community memory is so on the nose and so kind of perfect for what those spaces are. And I think, if we're really going to like talk about community memory now, the greatest example of that would probably be Wikipedia. You know, there's like any enterprise that maybe sums all of that up. It might be that one, this kind of collective remembrance of the co-edited internet, which is like hyperlinked super densely and connected between all of these related ideas, and kind of allowing you to amble and drift like through knowledge and through those spaces. And there's a few works in this show that deal with Wikipedia. I think this one that's currently screening ducks in and out of Wikipedia spaces. The new work that's in the show, which is a browser extension that kind of remembers the mouse movements of everyone who's visited that space and aggregates them over times to create these like desire paths through with like links and the page itself. I don't have it running on this user account, which is an oversight. Otherwise, I'd pull it up. But neither here nor there. It'll be in the show. Wikipedia is like a really interesting example of this, of kind of co-presence in online space. And there's like a form of celebrity available there too, from people who kind of like illustrate articles from their own bodies, or to those who like kind of have personal attachments to like specific subjects or regions, or those who are trying to like translate from one language to another, and to like the infamous kind of Wikipedia vendettas, or people who are perpetuating hoaxes, or kind of like people who want to live in a world that conceives of other particular facts as true, and that Wikipedia even works anyway despite all of these conflicting desires is like a big testament to how people on balance show up to produce things that function, even if you have kind of wildly differing visions of what that world would look like. It's still capable to construct a cohesive whole. And it isn't just Wikipedia that kind of like fosters that type of collaboration and, individual contribution that build something broader. Like the internet's also kind of full of this. People being like quote unquote helpful, often by their own personal definitions of helpful. And it is, again, I think one of those spaces in which it's very easy to forget this, because there are broad examples of a world of horror that is opened up by like internet access, and the ways in which people have, can create harassment campaigns, or can organize or radicalize others in ways that are quite dangerous. It kind of subsumes, I think, the layer of generosity that still holds up like a vast majority of internet spaces. You see this still like on the I think basically every website that is under an influx of bot submitted and AI submitted answers right now that are trying desperately to still be useful resources, and that their human editors are like doing the best they can. You see this on spaces like Stack Overflow, on Wikipedia, on GitHub, right? Any kind of like community space in which people have come together and organized and built a thing, and are still doing so, even though it's gotten increasingly harder over the past couple of years of online space. And I think in some ways, right, this capacity to reach out to others and say, like, hey, does this thing happen to anyone else? Or like, I'm interested in this idea. Has anyone else experienced this? Is one of those kind of like the most radical potentials of the internet that has been realized, and it's quite banal in fact, that you can be like, hey, like I'm having this weird thing with the bottom of my foot, and someone on some subreddit somewhere will be like, oh yeah, like that's probably this thing, go to your doctor, tell them this. Or or I am my experience of like desire for other people doesn't in fact match what any of my peers are experiencing. Is anyone else like uh, feel similarly to me about this? And someone might be like, oh yeah, like you're probably looking for this term, there's a whole group of community, people who live on this forum, join this. Those That's capacity to connect with others through lived experience, even distance from you, is like a deeply powerful component of internet spaces. And again, I think has kind of become so de facto that it's easy to forget, right? Um, you know, and I think that co-presence of others really like comes to the fore there, because like all of that is circling the other person who's also on their computer, like also there in the night, also browsing through digital spaces, also navigating and forming a path and like clicking through and present with you as they're saying like, oh yeah, I've also experienced that. Because it's kind of easy to forget that being online, even deep in Wikipedia or some subreddit or like on YouTube at 3 a.m. is like not being alone, even if the specifics of it are really hidden. I maintain these like couple of really big spreadsheets and resource lists, the kinds of things that like always have visitors on them. The one that's most relevant to this show is the Tiny Tools directory, which is like a whole bunch of open source tools. But these ones are kind of interesting because oftentimes you'll click through and you'll see other people's like, you'll be like, oh, the anonymous aardvark or whatever is up here in the corner at 2 a.m. also looking at kind of like opportunities or ways for them to be in the world together. And we kind of sit there in the middle of the night as like I update links down in like row 500 or whatever, and I can see their kind of like cursors moving around, and it those moments of connectivity are oddly rare, which I think brings up the question, why? Like, if so much of online space is about like sharing it with others, it's kind of, here, I'm gonna scroll way down. If so many of our online spaces like are about kind of fundamentally built by and about sharing space with other people, it's like, why, when we are presented websites that are without activity notifications and a friends list and the social feed and the timeline, like, does it feel kind of lonely on them? Like, why is it so easy to forget in the night that it is other people that your computer is connected to? Like, why that constructed distance? And I think some of it is quite intentional, right? Whether that's for reasons of personal privacy and security, which are very real, or for the financial swing of the internet, like post 2000s, kind of increasingly away from hand-built peer-to-peer spaces and increasingly towards companies that trade on connecting you ever more efficiently to others, and monetizing that type of connective intimacy. And so, you have an internet that we're kind of mid-swing in the quote-unquote enshittification of internet spaces. You only have to do a Google search to see how little of the internet is now hand-constructed, right? And how many of those listicles and websites that now rise to the top of every search are AI-generated trash that are kind of like, SEO stuffing to rise to the top. And it's like, that contemporary information exchange is like somewhat automated and obfuscated, right? You're not like lodging every piece of data that's arriving on your machine. You're not like experiencing the distance between you and another person. They really like it's this the internet has moved from a space of like the party to a space of at best the newsletter. You know, this kind of the algorithmic timeline does this too, where you are not seeing kind of like real time interactions with people anymore. You're seeing things that have been aggregated and floated to the top for you. And you know, but in a lot of ways, like this type of networked information system really wasn't and still isn't a given. You know, peer-to-peer networking and file sharing, torrent technologies, hosting websites or email clients on servers in your own home was once more common than it is now, and it's still a thing that could return. And even if it doesn't, you know, that type of information exchange at massive scale, person to person, as well as like person to server to person, holds it all up, right? We're still very much like touching one another in those spaces. Yeah, so I think, you know, there's a lot of nostalgia, and I think that general like train of thought, and it's easy to fall into this space of nostalgia for an internet that was, or even not even an internet that was, but like the world that could have grown from the internet that was becoming before it was very clear what, you know, how it could also be leveraged in in other ways that were more familiar to us. But I think the subject of this show is very much still about the lives that are lived regardless, you know, the that it doesn't that regardless of the pressure that is kind of placed on people, whether in physical space or digital ones, they manage to, you know, we manage to make meaningful lives of connection with one another inside of the margins of those spaces. And, you know, I miss an internet that's hosted hodgepodge also, that's like constructed messily, and linked together laterally, and that looks and feels homemade, not just is homemade, which again, a majority of it still is. But even in this era now, right, like people find their own uses for tools, they build their homes in the unlikeliest of places. And, you know, in the same way that like hot linking and iframes and comment sections and CC all emails and homepages and forums like held and still hold that other kind of internet, those same kinds of spaces are still being explored and built out of the current edges, right? Whether these are Facebook roleplay groups where 17 million people pretend to be like ants posting things like Bite or Lyft together, or live streams of fish tanks or the Northern Lights, or long-running play-by-post and play-by-email games, or even in like tabletop games adapted to function over Zoom and Discord calls, or in Google Sheets, or, you know, wherever that, you know, conversational storytelling meets the technology of voice over IP, or even in the reemergence of RSS feeds and homepages that sit right alongside kind of the contemporary and even independent social media spaces that have popped up. All of this is still happening, right? Even if it's been pushed to a margin that isn't surfaced in the search. And you know, there's like, I think I've described this work, Anonymous Animal, as like an elegy to internet of hyper trusted connectivity, right? Iframes that can load any websites, links that don't check if you're a bot, bot traffic first. This kind of like trustedness from another era, and I've described it as like an elegy to that. But which is a mourning, right? But I'm like also reminded that there's other types of stronger connective structures than those of technological underpinnings, and those are community, right? Creative friendships, collaborations, neighbors, right? Both in place and in labor and in subject, who are like working towards a world together that is, in fact, less isolated and less beholden to platform capitalism, and where we have not just like more tools, but like also the right tools, tools that are like built towards that have inbuilt ideologies towards a better world. And I like say all of this to myself, I think often in my work, to remind myself that this world is like entirely and completely made by and with and for and of other people, and that touching any aspect of the world, even a digital one, is to touch something handmade. Yeah, I think that's the intro I've got for you. Okay.
Super, thank you. That was also perfect ending on this positive note. That is also what I see always in your work. They bridge not only to people but also to often over poetic or this very personal aesthetic which comes by through your works, and that gives always for me like a hope for the technology or for the internet and its function. And I see also these nostalgic things as productive things, not only like an escape or looking back or so. I see there like also an utopian idea, so that from the younger generation, so that they liking this kind of idea, what could that be or where, so like a fantasy about the history could be also a projection into the future. Yeah, so that could motivate to a new I don't know, a new hype of home pages or so, or you have now the movement back from Spotify back to MP3 player and pirating things, because all the streaming and the commercializing of music and so it's not really working out. And I remember also these moments, like as there was file sharing softwares in the 90s where you really could share the half of your computer, where I went then into other computers with the attempt to share find some software or so. But then I found music and images, and then I thought, oh wow, it's interesting. It's like looking in someone's living room. And this is what later then was the profiles, what you described, so that you walk and that you surf or that you stroll. You could say like a flaneur, so from profile to profile, and meet the other person. But on the other hand, I also understood always why this can't be forever, because somehow for me it was like, the internet, like a metaphor. It could be a city, and then you have the public transportation, like these contacts and channels where we meet each other, and then you enter in part of a train, and then you don't want to speak with everyone. There's there, but then you find your place, and maybe there's a moment where you speak, but you're not alone in a sense, and you see you're with others, and you see how they think and feel. Also, you get the atmosphere of the times and so on, but you're not always come in contact. So, and if this is mediated, it has also its advantages. So so I can also understand why things get more abstract and get representations, so that you don't have to work through through every moment. I don't know. Could you understand what I meant? And so this kind of tension was for me always also with the internet. So on one hand, I liked these kind of convenient situations where things were prepared for me, so that I have not to do the work. But then on the other hand, also I like to find things or work my path through all the chaotic moments. And also what I would like to, before we open up maybe, because because it was also quite intense, your presentation. But one thing I would like to ask was how you deal with, or how you see this material, what you described, what is so loaded now into the iframes, and so that it's like it's like founded footage. It's like it's like this object trouvé or so. Yeah, what is it for? Is in regard to the material of the internet, for in the material to your work? Is it how you see it, and is it also this kind of aesthetic? It seems so that also in the Roblox work, that you are fascinated by these kind of moments. They are not have the intention, or they are not made for the art world, but they have this appearance, or is it? I don't know. There is something I would like to ask, but I couldn't really formulate the question. But I hope you got the.
I mean, I will say, I think the thing that we share in our practice is an interest in YouTube, right? Yeah, and so, or at least historically, obviously YouTube's a very different place than it was in 2008, 2010, you know. But I think, let me pull this up. So a long time ago, and maybe one of the kind of first successful projects that I was making in internet spaces was this project, Snowfall Destroys Three Cars. It definitely wasn't my first attempt, but I think it was one of the first ones that worked. This was a curatorial YouTube project that I did with a collaborator named Zoe Sparks, where we were really thinking about, these kind of like brief personal casual videos, these like little kind of detritus moments that were being uploaded to YouTube in the time, that still are, but obviously YouTube is also kind of like a television network in a very weird way. It operates very differently now. But we had a browsing habit independently, I think, where we were kind of moving through, and I'll just pull up some of these. Okay, yes, you use cookies. Okay. We had an independent browsing habit, Zoe and I, where we would like move through these spaces and kind of make playlists and save them off. And we wanted to think about, how to arrange them with really particular care. So they, moved from video to video, and what screening them in a room would feel like. And, if there was capacity to kind of focus attention of a crowd to the screen. Very funny. Like ad interventions in the 2011 playlist. Gosh, what was I saying? Yes. So I do think one of the things that we maybe share, because I know you have a similar practice historically, is like working with YouTube videos and curating found footage from YouTube, is an interest in those small fragments and what they look like assembled into more not more complete works, because they're complete unto themselves, but if they're arrangeable into arcs and patterns, and what that feels like when presented to a room. These playlists are no longer complete because, of course, it's been 15 years, so a lot of the work that was inside of them, a lot of the videos that were inside of them, have been removed or made private, or the accounts are no longer up. So they're not really their original selves, but the echoes are kind of there. But let's see, but those playlists, I think a thing that's really fundamental about internet spaces, and maybe the interest in YouTube videos too, and how those fragments, what the like found object is like in internet space, is that it remains in situ. At least it's really important for me that they are not downloaded, and turned into something else. There's a version of those projects, and I think a reasonable question that we got a lot when we would people would say like, oh, are the videos, like, are those playlists still up? And we'd have to say like, well, they are, but not really, because many of the videos that were in them have been removed, so they're not really complete and you can't really watch them. Was people would be like, well, why didn't you just download them and then you could have a movie? And I think it's really critical not to do that with internet space because when they remain in situ, they're within their own context, right? They have the medium specificity of the space in which they were uploaded, but then they also still are within the power and control of that original uploader. And you know, one of the great like tricks of maybe the data gathering practices of the current era is they don't really respect this. When a data set is created out of Flickr photos or YouTube videos that are not, necessarily they were either fully just stolen or even if those were licensed correctly, even if they were Creative Commons materials, maybe not given over to that idea, because a lot of people license their work to the Creative Commons or public domains without really understanding the data gathering and like training practices that a lot of that material would be given into later. Regardless, when things are kind of pulled out of online space and go to a hard drive somewhere, when they're cut up and they're severed from their original uploader and context and comment sections and descriptions and dates, and there's this big loss of context around it, and then also this like severing of credit that is really a shame, because the coolest part about working with the internet as a medium is that it's all links, right? It's links all the way down. It's all just like hyperlinks that are pointing at your own material, your own assets, your own objects, your own videos, but also those of other websites and strangers and references, and go here and look at that. And that connectivity is really, it's like the living part of it, and the data without that connective structure is like both dead and also no longer within the creative control of the person who put it online, right? So there's a project that no longer runs. The documentation of it was in this show, Default File Name TV, which is like a YouTube aggregator that pulled videos from YouTube that didn't have edits to the file name. And it was really, really important that this ran live in real time, and that it was like doing the search, through YouTube directly and pulling videos and upload, because you could have a direct linkage to, oh yeah, the website's even gone now, of course, because I stopped paying it because YouTube revoked my API key and we got in a fight for several years about it. And then they stopped replying to my emails. So it's gone. But this project, would retain title, credit. You could click it. It would link through to that person's profile. And then critically, if they made the video private or took it offline or put it unlisted, it wouldn't show up in this project anymore. And it's the way that I think like morally and ethically you can get around using found materials, found footage, and kind of doing things like saying in this project, right, saying like, can you see this dog that's on Wikipedia, is that if that person who put the dog on Wikipedia decided they don't want the dog to be on Wikipedia anymore, then that link is severed, but the project still runs, and it's okay. It's all right if you make a work that's created out of iframes or hyperlinks and the links rot because the structure's still there, because that's kind of the promise of the space.
Wow, I really love it, because it is also very brave to live with this link rot. Let's say, that you see how the work is partly and step by step, let's say, destroyed or comes to an end. To accept this and not have these kind of need and drive to save everything for the future and for the career, or I don't know what. Yeah. So to hold this in place in its situation as it was made for, and that was also a little bit, we share the fascination for this kind of authentic, let's say, or the aesthetic of this material, which is not really made for the art world, but has some artistic moments, I would say, or let me, or it gives me space to think, which I'm appreciate and then would like to share with others. And that's the reason I think I used also your, because I a little bit before, so 2008 or so, I searched direct for 00.1.mov as a title to find all these funny things, and really also I think sometimes uploaded by incident, so not really took care about this, and then it was uploaded, and then you got also like a voyeuristic moment, so you got a view into a personal life somehow, which I was quite fascinated by. And so this I can understand this, but I never came on this moment to I always was stuck in YouTube, I have to say. But you have this broad variety of platforms. You're like a wanderer through the internet, so, and till Roblox, which is really a far end, I would say, or one of the peaks, and there you were also fascinated by this kind of, let's say, user-created, not intentional arty works and worlds, and you were wandering through. So I see there a similarity. So I see this goes. It's like a continuity through all your works, and that was what. I was asking, what is the fascination on this kind of, let's say, amateurish or aesthetic, or this kind of not artistic, intentionally artistic programmed aesthetic. So that.
Yeah, we can talk about Roblox specifically a little bit, because I think it's both a great example of hostile platform beloved margin, and also a space in which I think I wish that I had not chosen to work in Roblox, which is, I think, an interesting lesson for me, but is like also worth talking about, because, Roblox is really fascinating. I'm sure you've all heard of it. It is it's one of the biggest games in the world. It's primarily made by and played by children. Less made by now, but even so, because when the way it's set up is, when you download Roblox Player, you automatically download Roblox Studio. It's very easy to create places, is what they're called, inside of Roblox, and it's free, and they mostly make their money on microtransactions and a very bad exchange rate between money and Robux. They're like in-game currency. And what materially this means is, of course, they're a publicly traded organization. They have a big stock valuation, and it's pretty much essentially built on children's labor. So like they're fully evil. But like many evil places that are free to access and build things on and networked, it is a space that hosts a lot of really, really interesting spaces and experiments. There's a feeling, I think, being on it, that it's it's kind of, this is like what the home screen looks like. So there's all these games inside of it that you can choose. Some of them have, Adopt Me, which is like a very popular adoption role play game on Roblox that you can see. It has like 250,000 consecutive players, which is a ridiculous number of people that are currently playing a game. and those people are often in instances, but a lot of them have no one in them at any given time because there's millions and millions of places that have been made, again, mostly by kids. And so you have this setup. This is kind of what the basic template looks like. And there's a feeling moving through a lot of these spaces, if you're just kind of exploring and doing that type of searching, like, 0001.mov style searching and looking for undervisited places. It feels a lot like flipping through like kids' sketchbooks, or, or like finding fragments of materials on the street. Like there's this kind of feeling of moving through those spaces and running into these exciting, strange little constructions that were often put together for someone's birthday party, or like a hangout spot between friends, or a fan game, very commonly, right? Often, kids who are like really interested in a particular fan community and want to make a world that's kind of reflecting that. And so it is a place that is absolutely full of deeply loved and hand-built experiences that are also trapped inside of this space that they can't escape, because you can't export from Roblox. There's no way to get your projects out. The best thing you can do is kind of like record a video and document the experience, but of course 12-year-olds are not generally doing this, and so it's this kind of wild, hyper bordered networked game space that nothing can escape out of, but that is so big and of itself that it has its own like culture, rules, context. But I think I was at the time streaming some Roblox games and explorations with a collaborator of mine, V. Buckingham, who kind of suggested that we should move through those spaces, and we did, and we streamed. We had a series that we called Roblox from the Depths, which we streamed for about a year. And through those kind of like, through those explorations, I became really interested in the way that the marketplace sort of works in Roblox, which is they have, and the kind of their toolbox, because they have an asset store. Well, they have like a microtransaction asset store in which you can buy, like facial features for your character and clothes, and all of those are user generated mostly, so you're paying someone, just it's kind of Second Life coded. You're paying someone for an aesthetic skin, which you can get that Robux back out to local currency. It's just the exchange rate is extremely bad, so there are people that try to primarily make a living by creating skins in Roblox, but it's most of that just gets eaten by the company. But then there's this other thing that happens there, where if you are uploading assets to create a place, those go into this weird big community toolbox, and those are not microtransactioned. Those are just sort of available as these little like piecemeal bits and pieces that anyone can bring into their projects, because it's not just that the games are networked, it's like their toolbox, their construction system is also networked. And so part of what I became really interested in were all of these weird little like fragments of individual making that had shown up in hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of individual games. It's like, oh yeah, that street sign, I recognize that. That's like here and here and here and here and in all of these different places, and these different kind of accumulations of objects that get recycled over and over into these spaces to hang out in. So I ended up making some pieces in Roblox because I was so interested in this tool and its edges and the ways in which kind of like those assets and models were recycled. And kind of here's one of just like a bunch of different examples of shapes, right? And the types of worlds that those were making. But also, I think since then I've gotten a little bit more serious about truly and deeply trying to believe the adage that that you cannot you can't make a work outside of the material with which you construct it, right? Like at the end of the day, I'm not 12 like drawing in a sketchbook or like making Roblox places. I'm an artist with an audience, and there's some responsibility in the tools that you use, and Roblox is not it's not the world that I want for the future, even if it is a world that exists and creates like beloved space. So I think I would have been better off exploring it and then walking away. But there's something to be said for including that work in a narrative too, because the I'm trapped there as well. That work will never leave that platform because I chose to make it there, and so it's in the like waiting to fail section, because at some point Roblox pulls the plug on every undervisited server, my work included.
Thank you very much. I think now we are really at 3 o'clock, so we made the hour, and I hope that we have still some time until the sound check will start, and we can't hear any word anymore. So, and we will stream as long as possible. So, and I think we open up now to the audience for questions. You hear already the noise. I hope you don't will flee the space immediately, but let us see. Is there a question from the audience? Yes, Teresa.
I don't know if it's like a fully question. It will maybe turn into a question. I really like what you said about in the past it was possible to kind of see the history accumulate in real time on the internet, especially like in certain like interfaces. And I'm really interested in how to kind of tell stories of the internet, which is always updated, so it has this like really weird temporality. And what I like about what you do is that you sort of not like explicitly criticize what is wrong with the internet today, but you kind of show how it has been done and you continue it. So I've been often thinking about if we don't think of, websites as digital object, but as a process that someone started and we can maybe continue rather than trying to archive something from the past. Like, do you relate maybe to this? Like how, because I think you were talking about this nostalgia and how it can be like a really good like generator also. So I'm kind of interested if you also, you yourself, how do you understand this retelling of your experience as a past of the internet? And is it a past, or is it like through the continuation, is it now, like actualization of the like now again this?
I hope that that was our microphone is not so long, but maybe you could wrap up the question.
Yeah, totally. For those that are watching on Twitch, if anyone is watching on Twitch, the question was basically about, you can stop me if I sum you up wrong. Okay. It was about the history of internet spaces that accumulate in real time and how that can be documented, or how it can be archived or even referenced, because they often hide their past versions. That, if you go to a website on any given day, you're simply going to see the website as it is, not the website as it was. Is that, and like how, yeah, and kind of, yeah, different relationships with that. I think a big one for me is view source. So let me just go to some of these like very early I'm not in my normal browser and I don't know how to view source over here. Okay. We'll go here. Nope. Page source. Okay. So I think one of the things I didn't talk about in kind of that talk, but that is definitely a subtext of all of that, is theft, right? Or like learning as as a space in kind of in the homepage era. It was very, very, very easy to like hit Command U probably. Again, on this browser, I'm not totally sure, and pull up the source and kind of see how a website was put together, you know, and to kind of, for instance, like go, okay, I see that like this is all made of long scrolling images and they seem to have, you know, like different parameters that are going to change their kind of like parallax scrolling. And it'd be very simple for someone to go through and I encourage it, right, to go through and copy this code and replace all the images and see what happens and change the numbers and see what happens. It's like how people learned to code HTML primarily was, you know, there were some tutorials, but also it was going like, ooh, this person has a really cool website. What is happening there? You know, like how are these things put together? And that is Command U. Great. Okay. And it's difficult to do the sort of archival work where you might, for instance, look for shared code across different websites to kind of look through timestamps and updates and go like, ah, okay, this was probably pulled from like this, you know, this person wrote this originally, this person adapted it, it went on, like this kind of piece of code went on a very popular website that is visited by people from this subgroup. You see this a lot on the indie web even now, I think, spaces that are like hosted on NeoCities primarily, but also a number of other kind of like indie web centers where even now someone will be like, I figured out how to give you a sparkly animated cursor, finally, a thing that again browsers have made very difficult in the past 10 years. And that same kind of like a little bit of code proliferates and changes throughout a community. And I think sometimes tracing those connective threads can be really constructive when you start thinking about time and history and how pages shift and change, because you're not just constrained to the one site, right? It's not just like the one thing that you're looking at. It's also who it touched and who stole little bits and how it echoed, and you know, even the like yeah, I guess this is probably from 2011. It's pulling a Ajax jQuery, like this is old, right? Like this is from 2012. And so I think sometimes going to the subsurface of these spaces can be really, really productive, both for me, you know, as I'm trying to look through and see how things were constructed. And also sometimes they like hide secrets in their source. Sometimes there's commented out sections of old bits of code, right, rather than it being completely edited and removed. Sometimes the little fragments and bits are still there. Yeah, I don't know if that answered your question. It's kind of where I go.
Let's try another one. There's another one. Timon, maybe really loud. Yeah.
I was very surprised. That sounds terrible. I didn't expect you to talk so much about the internet as a platform for communication and for contact. Because if I just look at your work, you know, it seems like it's a very formalistic approach to internet technologies and platforms, and you know, and so maybe you can talk a little bit about this yeah, this difference between, on the one hand, this being very much also in the spirit of early internet art that was a lot about messing around with HTML code or with the browser, and at the same time
Yeah, the question was about like where interpersonal communication sort of comes into web spaces that are not necessarily built for that. You know, I think maybe don't let me put words in your mouth, but the the question sort of seemed to say, well, there are a lot of social spaces on the internet. There's a lot of places that are expressly social on the internet, and the work that I'm doing is not in them. And so, why this interest on connectivity? If the focus remains on kind of Wikipedia or HTML in a kind of formal capacity, which I think is a very fair question. And I think part of it is that, I certainly live my life in more connected online spaces. This is not me. I spend a lot of the day on Discord, right? It's not like I don't have those connective structures. But I think the reason that I bring that to works that are about maybe I think I'm interested in the project of making, of like socially making, even when that doesn't look like real-time collaboration. I think Wikipedia is a really great example of this as a absolutely massive human undertaking, just like beyond the scope and scale of so many things that we do as people, that is primarily led by individual volunteers with like particular interests and like loves in this world, right, that they want to make evident for others. And that is an absolutely massive collaborative undertaking that is not that is kind of like hanging out and building towards something, but is not necessarily the same as being on a chat platform or a social media app. There's this quote that I didn't read, but I maybe will pull up from Ursula Franklin. Does anyone know this Ursula Franklin's work? She's amazing. She was a technologist who was primarily working in the 80s, Canadian technologist who like primarily studied metallurgy and like metal technologies, but then also has this really great series of talks called The Real World of Technology, which is worth reading if it's a new reference to anyone. She's kind of got it like all figured out in 1988 in this way that's just like, dang, Ursula Franklin. But she has this quote. When human loneliness is a source of income through devices, we had better stop and think, like, what are we doing? Which is really quite cutting for 1989. But I do think maybe I have an interest in spaces that are not surfacing human loneliness as an attractive pull, right? Wikipedia, your homepage, browsing through forum posts, or kind of like getting lost in like deep in Flickr images are not primarily spaces of loneliness. They can be side effects, I think, of being lonely, but more than that, there's side effects of being interested. And yet they're still made by community, right? They're still kind of like held up by collaborative work. Versus there are many, many, many online spaces that primarily function to be sources of income because they promise to mediate loneliness, or because they, center themselves as solution for loneliness, even if they often don't, in fact, fix the problem. And those might look more like a contemporary social media platform, which I don't think necessarily need to be the sites of my work. They're not spaces that I love. Anybody else? Okay.
Just first of all, I'm really heartbroken to have come so late to this talk. I was dead certain that it was announced as for 3 p.m.
It changed,
Yeah.
then we changed it. Yeah, it was.
Anyway, like I just
Sorry,
yeah, I
because
wanted
of
to
the
be here
double
on time.
booking.
That's what I wanted to say. Also,
It's recorded. You can.
thank you. I will yeah, look into that. You recently ran a course with
SFPC, yeah.
exactly.
School for Poetic Computation.
Exactly. All you need is a browser. I almost signed up for that, and I was wondering whether you could maybe share some anecdotes and outcomes, things that people produce, or I don't know, just memorable moments.
Yeah. Gosh, I wish I did the responsible thing, and I decided to project from like the spare user account on my computer, because I was like, I shouldn't be streaming my browser with all of my stuff, but it means I'm not logged into anything. I wonder, but I have a great syllabus for that. Maybe it has been indexed. Okay, we've got no. That's good. Better that it be probably a little bit more private for those students. But yeah, I taught this class called The Browser is Already a Game Engine. It is really thinking about I mean, one of the things we really didn't talk about in this is that I also work in games. There's no, I mean, Roblox is a game, gift game, which is over in that corner, is I think in the game section. But I also make like video games, and those are coming from a really different perspective. I think thinking about story and narrative and like play from this kind of other space that is very much still thinking about time with other people often, and shares many of the threads with the browser, but regardless. But the browser's already a game engine is a class that was sort of making the argument that that all of the formal elements of the browser, the building blocks of the space, are also like heavily utilizable in game design, and that you don't necessarily need like the game engine, and like something like Unity or Unreal or Godot that sits outside of this space and that gives you, like particular types of assets that you can construct like worlds through, that the browser already has modalities of play kind of built inside of it. So that class was honestly, it was kind of a like, all right, let's speed run learning HTML and CSS and JavaScript, but oriented very much towards playful, weird, integrative experiences, thinking about links, thinking about like kind of underutilized HTML elements, lots of work with the image map tool, some work with iframes, lots of like formal experiments with like drop-down systems, UI forward games. The browser is like a very user interface like forward design space, which means that like if you're making games that are tied into like clicking things, reading things, arranging things, lots of text. We had a whole spreadsheets week where we kind of talked about spreadsheets as like engines for play. This is a good example of a spreadsheet-driven game. I'm gonna have to go through the whole talk. This is also a good example of a spreadsheet-driven game. So yeah, Driftmine Satellite is kind of like this. I'm actually gonna go to the itch. Maybe. Okay, well, regardless. I hope that answered your question. Basically, it was a class of sort of like thinking about making websites, but making websites like particularly for interactivity, play, and the different ways in which that play can exist in the browser. And also games that don't hide themselves, like that don't pretend like the browser isn't real. You know, I think a very common way that people make web games is to is coming from a Flash tradition, and Flash was great. Don't get me wrong, rest in peace, Flash. But Flash is like is just a thing that sits inside of the browser. It doesn't really interact with or respect or understand the language of internet space in that way. And so that was a class that was really not, it's not looking at like, oh, let's make things that are, that sit in a little window and don't recognize the context in which they live, but are rather games that engage with all of the things that are available, like the console log, like selectable text, like all of it being HTML elements that you can interact with and drag around and, you know, pull onto your desktop and vice versa, and all of the kind of like potential of that.
Yeah, is there another question? I think we have now to close. And but that means not that it's closed. You can already also talk afterwards, more in private. But I think then I stop the streaming and stop so far then this talk. Okay, thank you very much, Everest.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, great exhibition, great talk.